Thank you very much. Very good. Got it right.
So far, so good?
So far, so good.
All right. I'm just going to read you a little bit of what the late critic Roger Ebert said. He said, "It was the most notable use of film that I've been able to witness as a film goer. Noble in its simplicity and its honesty. The Up series validates all the careers in film because there is a project like this which shows how film is a time machine and an empathetic device like no other." And of course, he listed the film as one of his top 10 films ever made. Not bad.
No,
Your career, it's a lot to fit into the next 70-odd minutes, but what I plan to do is to start talking about 7-Up. Then we'll talk about your other filmmaking pursuits through the doldrums of British cinema in the 1970s, the Hollywood years, and then circle back to the Up series. But to start with, I think it's an appropriate place to start in 1964. Alec Douglas Home was Prime Minister, a conservative Prime Minister at the time. The Beatles were releasing their first film, Hard Day's Night. Radio Caroline and the first pirate radio stations were happening. 90% of British households had a television set. And you were 23 and had been at Granada as a trainee for 6 months, something like that?
yeah.
And had just graduated from Cambridge with a law and history degree.
Correct.
So take me back. What was in your mind? What took you to Granada with that degree in particular?
I wanted to go to Granada because they were the cutting edge of British television at that time. They revolutionized the whole world of British television, if you see what I mean.
We should say they were pretty much the new kids on the block.
Yeah,
I think
there were 4 or 5 companies, but this was the one. It had recruited the most interesting people. Tim Hewitt, who was, I think, 28, was the editor of the Daily Express and all this thing. It was full of young people from different parts of, the society in terms of, as I said, from the theatre, from the cinema, from television and all that. It was the place to be. And they, it was a bit, I'm afraid, going back on this, it was a little bit, as it were, people would boo, but nonetheless they went round to Oxford and Cambridge places and interviewed us. And then they took 30 of us up to Manchester, and we stayed there for 2 days, 3 days, and then they chose 6 of us to go and live up there. And that was the beginning of that. And it
sounds a bit like the 7-Up process.
Yeah, doesn't it? So anyway, it was a great place to be, and we learned a lot. My little group of 6.
And did you feel like rebels in a way? Because prior to the mid-50s, there was only the BBC, and the BBC had one channel, and that was it.
No, it was. I mean, this was the Daily Mirror at its best, Granada, and whereas the BBC was the Times or the Guardian chugging along. It was the place to be. They had all the exciting executives they'd taken from the newspapers and whatever. The famous Tim Hewitt, who reorganized the whole of really British documentary television. And so it was a really exciting place. And of course, guess who was around the corner, popping in to play their songs? It was the Beatles were there, from Liverpool coming in. So I grew up in this little atmosphere, only for a few weeks, but they used to show up and do their latest album or song, then jump in their van and go off and tour the north of England. And what was so fascinating about it, you knew they were going to be great. You absolutely knew it. But London didn't know anything about it. And it was only for a few weeks, but it was kind of heaven that we up the north knew something that they didn't. And we were right.
Yeah. Would you consider yourself middle class?
Yeah, definitely, yeah. Both my parents were educated. My father, neither of them went to university, but they were educated and whatever. So, yeah, I would say what you just said.
And you got a scholarship to City of London School prior to Cambridge.
Yeah.
When was it that film and television kind of called you? What was exciting about that to you?
Well, I loved, we had a little television, and my parents weren't shy to let us watch it, and whatever. And, then just trying to get this correct, and then I went to the City of London School with my younger brother as well. And that was also a fantastic place to be in London for the theatre. That was the golden age of the theatre. So there are all these theatres and cinemas right outside the school. We our school's on Blackfriars Bridge, as it were, not on the bridge, but just off the bridge. Mm. And, it was so you felt you were in the middle of something. And you were. So we had all the music coming down from the north of England, and in theatre and whatever, we had all the advantage of, the new, just the new energy of theatre, of John Osborne and people like that, and there it was. After school you could go to the Royal Court and see something like that if you were so interested. So it was a wonderful time to be in London, and you could see that the world was changing in terms of entertainment, and we were right in the middle of it.
And that spirit was very much alive in Cambridge while you were there. I understand John Cleese was
mad as hell, but yes.
Mike Newell.
Newell was there, Trevor Nunn was there, Stephen Frears was there, hundreds of us were there. We all went in and took, because it was wide open. There was just the BBC and the early ITV things, but there was no one really trying to break the barriers and bring young people in, except companies like Granada. And then, the BBC had to hurry up and catch up with this. Mm-hmm. So, and again, Granada was probably the best place to be. It was the best run, most most dangerous, if you like, place to be in.
And World in Action specifically, the 7 Up was created for World in Action. So that was Granada's current affairs show, right?
Yeah.
And the genesis of 7 Up was not to do a lifelong chronicle of these lives.
No, not at all.
What was the idea to start with?
The simple idea at the heart of it is, who gets the chances to do something and who doesn't get the chances, how unfair British society is, that only a very few % of people get opportunities because of their education or whatever, because of wealth and stuff like that. But, the real multitude of people never got a look in. That was and that's what 7 Up did. It showed how unfair the whole system was. That, as long as you were in the right place in the right time, you could get into the BBC and whatever, but you couldn't get into anywhere near Granada, and unless the Granada and those other companies changed their system of recruiting people, which is what they did.
I think there's a statistic, I can't remember if it was in 7 Up, it might have been in the second film, 7 + 7, to the effect that of the poorer kids, only 1 in 10 would go to higher education.
Yeah, probably, yeah.
And most of them would get jobs at 15.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was kind of shocking. And, then all, of course, and it continued. And so all the people who had good education got all the good jobs. And other people who hadn't had a good education, you know, just join the general list of people trying to get enough money to, you know, have breakfast or something. So, you know, it was tremendously loaded for those people who had money, parents with money or whatever, against people who were having a regular education and stuff like that. Most people didn't really get a good, you know, there was the top end of education, which was brilliant, very expensive and all that, and then there was the bottom part of the education, which was, you know, overcrowded and harassed and whatever, and criminal and all that sort of things. It was very hair-raising. And really what, I suppose, the first thing that the Up series did was, you know, we decided to choose people from different backgrounds. We weren't interested in just people who had achieved something or had advantages. We took a generation, I think it was about 14 children from different parts of society, and examined what their lives were like at 7 years old. And of course it was shattering. You know, it just printed the whole thing at large, that only a tiny percentage of people got a chance. The rest of us didn't. And that's how 7UP started.
And it was your job to actually locate, as the researcher, you had to choose the 14 kids.
There's two of us, me and Gordon McDougall, Gordon who left and worked in theatre. But yes, I mean, it was Hewitt's idea, and you know, the people who were running World in Action, which had started there, although it hadn't really left its mark. You know, one of the special ones they did in their first season was this one about 7-year-old children. You know, give me a child until you're 7 and I will show you the man, as it were. And it was pretty clear as we were researching it and trying to find a good cast to be in it. We only had 3 weeks to prepare it. You know, that life was much quicker than that time, but it came out and it created a huge storm, way beyond, you know, your average documentary on television. And it really did, in a sense, begin to change the world. And it wasn't people with great accents who were telling the rest of the nation what a mess they were making of education, but it was just talking to the children and seeing like that, and just seeing the potential wastage of people who've got brains or got interest or whatever, was getting no chance of doing anything. But, you know, the people who had the money or had the position.
There's this stark contrast in the film between the posh kids, the rich kids, who can tell you, even at the age of 7, where they're going to go, which private schools they're going to go to next, and which college they're going to go to in Cambridge or Oxford.
Yes, that's right. Terrifying it was.
And then the poor kids are like, what does university mean?
Yeah, I know, it was painful. But what was interesting about it was only ever going to be one film, and it did create a huge outlet in the press and all that kind of stuff. It really did have an impact, a sort of thing you dream of. You know, that people watched it, everybody went berserk by the fact what the message it was giving, and it changed society for a bit.
So at what point did somebody have the idea to revisit 7 years later?
Well, 5 years later, if you can believe that. I mean, I would have thought, looking back at it, would have been 5 minutes later, you'd think, let's go back to these. But no, it wasn't. And I was as much to blame as anybody. I'd been one of the researchers on it, so I knew all the kids and all this sort of stuff. But it wasn't until the man who was then running Granada, Dennis Foreman, came to sit in the canteen with me in Manchester, and he said, which was pretty unnerving for me, having my baked beans on toast with it. And he just said, have you ever thought of going back and seeing them? And I said, yes, that's a good idea, isn't it? And so we did it. We set it up, did it, and it was everything you wanted, because we had too many children at 7 because we were never going to necessarily carry on with them. Mm-hmm. So we pruned out 7 up with the people and found those people again and made them 7 years old. And then from then there was no stopping it. I mean, it was just amazing as it was. And it was amazing that people hadn't thought of it before, frankly. It was one of those moments when, what was I thinking about? I mean, and I was as much to blame as anybody.
Of course, in retrospect, I'm assuming you would agree that the cross-section of kids was not very scientific.
No,
I mean, for a start, you only have 4 women.
Well,
4
yes,
girls.
but I mean, we take a lot of stick for that, and it's absurd, really, for us too, because that was all over society. That was a whole other issue. The women had no jobs and stuff like that. And that took a long time to put right. So although that was true, you couldn't, if you'd done it the correct way, people would have thought, what's all this about? All these women who wanted to have jobs and go in the army and still, everybody would have, I mean, no offense to ladies in the army, but I mean, Great Britain was miles behind, using women in a creative, fruitive way. So we did, thank God, have 4 women, small, but also I realized what was going to go on, and then so that's when I brought the wives of the boys in. So I, in a sly way, increased over the next kind of 2 or 3 shows to increase the number of women until now, although it's still not equal, I mean, at least it isn't outrageous as it was before, but it's just amazing how things were changing so quickly, socially at that time, between 1964 and 1970 and all that, the whole society was changing, and you had the Beatles and everything, and you had women rock and rollers and whatever.
Yeah.
So it was just a question of kind of seeing what was going on in front of you and putting that on this film.
There was also 13 white kids and 1
yes.
non-white.
Yeah, I mean, we didn't do that badly, but yes, of course. I mean, but that went on much longer. I mean, again, I didn't start putting people of different colour in the show ever, really, because I mean, I couldn't suddenly start.
Although it's interesting if you go back and watch, even by 21 up. Race and immigration are topics that were sufficiently in the zeitgeist that you're raising it with these young people.
Yeah. And I knew
which, of course,
would be
resonates today as you watch it because of the whole Brexit mess.
Yeah, but you could tell that I was behind, well behind where I should have been with race and people of colour and their importance in the. And also we were able to draw attention to the difference of schools and, how some schools got tons of money to do things and whatever, and some people had nothing. So it was very exciting because in some ways we became, that one first film became the torch for this, because there it was very understandable. It wasn't patronizing, but it had a really creaking, frightening kind of message to it, that if you were an Englishman, you were embarrassed by it. And it wasn't that we were being clever. We were because we were saying we'd been foolish. Oops, sorry. That we were too much as blame to anybody. We should have had more people of colour in the original, but we weren't any smarter than anybody else. But we just kind of fell on this idea, and that worked out well for us. And there we were.
The series, as it goes on, class becomes less important.
Yeah.
At what point did you realize that it was no longer centrally about class?
Well, it never really stopped being about class. I mean, it's still in there. If you look at 63 up, it's still there. It doesn't scream at you like it does before. But you know that we were fighting an upstage, a battle upstage to try and equalize it out. But it's easy with women and stuff like that because you can bring parts of women and the families in. But it's very difficult to kind of start putting people of different color or a different background or all that sort of stuff. We had enough poverty in it. I mean, we have enough people who had no chance of getting a decent education because there was no question about that. That was yelling at you. So we were covered there, but in terms of race and sort of representing Great Britain as to what it really was, which was not, a particularly racist society. I mean, it wasn't that great, but it wasn't horrific. But we didn't really have the raw material for it. We spreaded it out as much as we could. But at the end, it was always an embarrassment, and is really to this day.
Let's talk about your career at that time. From 1964 through the end of the 60s, you're at Granada, and you're doing all sorts of different things.
Yeah.
So there's documentary and there's drama. Your first dramatic credits, as I understand it, were on Coronation Street. How did that come about?
Pretty much, yeah. No, I mean, there were 6 of us in there, and I declared my interest in documentaries and all that kind of stuff. So, when they were doing, we were put on small local television programs, to put them together and, in a kind of inane way, direct them, but they was being shown to millions of people, God help them. But I mean, they were out there. So, that started. But I was very interested because I kind of plotted my life out rather cleverly, frankly, which isn't really what you'd think about me. But when I was at Cambridge, I read history for the first 2 years. And then I thought, what's all this about? Why am I doing all this? And so I changed completely and started reading law, which was, for me, much more interesting because it was dealing with social issues and stuff like that. And so that's what I did. And that was the jumping off point to being invited up to Manchester by Granada to, talk about joining the company. So I had a sense that the rest of them, the 5 of the 6, were all drama directors. That's what they wanted to do. But clever old me was the one that wanted to do, documentaries and get my hands dirty and all that kind of stuff. And it was really what I wanted to do. And I got that from my mother. I mean, my mother was very labor orientated with a big L. I mean, they weren't communist or anything like that, but they were very left wing. And so that was in my blood, I mean, in my milk, if you know what I mean. And then I could see a way, but if I did law, that might make openings for me in other things. And sure enough, when we went up there and they chose the first 6, I was the only one that mentioned doing current affairs. Everybody else wanted to be a drama director. And of course, they were falling off trees, drama directors, but no one wanted to do documentaries, and I did. So I've got a shortcut into it, as it were, and that's why I got asked to do this thing, because the guy who made it, was Canadian.
Paul Almond.
What? Well, be careful what I say now. Next sentence, isn't it? No, but anyway, he was a very clever man and a very good director, but he didn't have a clue about the English class system, and I did. From my mother and all that sort of stuff. So when we came to start doing the film, I was very, because I realized this was a great chance, not just for me, but for the station to do this, because it was a really brilliant idea. And so I got deep into it, and Paul Almond, who made the film, understood it, and he was able to bring his sort of poetic things to it, his filmmaking things, and I was, trying to put the political things in. I wanted it to be a political film. And that's how I drew my attention to me from the Granada management, and could see what was going on here, and that I wasn't showing off or being a dickhead or anything, humiliating him or anything. I was just being in his ear, saying, look, why don't we think about that? But we don't want to do another private school, do we? Well, let's go to another poor school and see what's going on like that. Mm-hmm. And so that was really, the beginning for me. And it wasn't till later on, after, we'd done that I decided to go back into the world of drama, and found out that my closest friend, Mike Newell, who was a director, was going on holiday. So, I did all these very bold things, which I never thought I'd ever do, or would even do now, but I just went up to the manager and said, can I do Coronation Street when Newell's on holiday? And so I did, and I did it quite well. And so about 6 months later, I was yanked out of that and put into Coronation Street.
Was Coronation Street every night?
No, it was twice a week.
Twice a week.
It only became much later on a weekly, a daily thing.
So you had training on the job, I guess.
Yeah, well, you did anyway at Granada, because they were a small company. It wasn't like the BBC when you were, put into a special place where you could practice things. We had to learn on the job, and my God, did we make some mistakes. I did a whole interview without putting any sound on it, so the people in Manchester who were watching it were completely baffled by what was going on.
Looking at your credits from 1968, 1969, you were doing lots of plays for television.
Yeah.
I would say maybe 7 or 8 plays each year, something like that.
A play would also be an episode of a drama series. It wouldn't be a one-off play, but I did a few of those. But that was the most interesting thing. But I got off Coronation Street and then went on to that kind of stuff.
And working with writers like Jack Rosenthal.
And Arthur Hopcroft and John Finch, people who do the best writers in television. And Newell and I were their little boys who did this, who directed the stuff for them, and they were great men, wonderful men, not remotely arrogant or superior, and they were all good North Country guys, for God's sake, who much preferred to talk about football than anything else, which had already been in my life and is still in my life, and blah, 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 to my shame. But, so I forgot, I lost my favour. I started thinking about football, and then I lost it. Crikey.
It happens.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, you say you'd mapped out your life and you'd thought about documentaries and you were political. Yeah. So what was the appeal of moving into drama, and at what point did you think, maybe I want to make films, movies? Well,
I was very interested in films from early on. From when I was at university, I used to go and watch films all the time. And clearly that was a whole different world and a very difficult world to penetrate. And whatever, and then I got a couple of breaks because I became quite well known in television, doing decent work. To get younger people like myself and Newell to do movies, not big movies, but small movies, was a big step for us and a big step for the English film industry as well. There were still great directors. People like Loach and things like that were 2 or 3 or 4 years ahead of us, and they came from different universities and whatever, but still the same thing. It was that, and it was universities, and then going into either the theatre or going into BBC drama. That was all happening all the time, and it was very much because Granada was already all the time building their staff up to since they became very quickly the kind of the real joy of ITV. They did great musical stuff. They used to get the Beatles in every year and all this sort of stuff. And so they were some of the other companies were drowning in quiz games and stuff like that. But Granada had a much more intelligent, much more middle class, if you want, way of looking at comedy, looking at popular music. So it was done in a much more intelligent and observant way, and so appealed to people, appealed to young people. They wanted to see. Granada knew who was big and popular and put them on the air. You know, other people kind of were dragging behind on people who had been around making a career for 20 years. So on every front, really, Granada was ahead. I mean, it didn't last that long, but for about my 4 or 5 years, you know, they were the shining light of British television.
And then in 1970 or so, you decided to go freelance.
Yeah, I did, and I talked about it to, you know, the people at Granada, and it was clear that, you know, there wasn't really enough stuff for me to increase my, you know, repertoire or whatever. And then I lucked into a small movie, which was kind of like a nightmare.
This is Triple Echo?
This is Triple Echo, which was a sweet country British film, which had in it Oliver Reed, who was a complete maniac, and Glenda Jackson, who was a tough girl. I mean, she wasn't a maniac like he was, but I mean, she was a very demanding girl. And as soon as it started, I knew I was in trouble. I mean, I knew I couldn't handle this. And so I sort of, both of them realized I was in trouble, you know, and I didn't pretend I wasn't in trouble.
Yeah.
And so between the three of us, you know, Glenda and Oliver and me, and obviously the crew around me, I mean, we kind of got to understand each other, and they guided me through it. So it was a free lesson of great use to me.
So what was the big difference between the plays that you've been doing for television to the feature film where you felt you were in over your head?
Well, I mean, Glenda had just won a second, Academy Award. You know, Oliver was an international name in the business, so these were major figures. And there was poor little me trying to tell them what to do, and thinking, why am I doing this? What do I know about this? But anyway, they understood, and I think they understood that I wasn't some young prick that came in and had these great ideas and tried to persuade them to do it. I was someone, you know, who was anxious to listen to what they had to say, because they were both major film stars. I mean, she'd already won 2 Academy Awards, Glenda, by that time. And Oliver, you know, was also a big movie star. So it was a frightening experience, but, you know, they got me through it.
But it didn't put you off?
No, because I felt that, in a way, by not pretending that I knew things I didn't know, that I would get their sympathy, because, I mean, they did need me. I mean, they did need me to kind of plan the shooting and all this kind of stuff. So it wasn't smart on their part to let me fall entirely to pieces and make nonsense. So the fact that I wasn't pretending to know what I didn't know, and what little bit I did know, I, you know, was knowledgeable about. I think that has kind of appealed to them in a way, in their different way. Because I mean, all that what's his name? Who was the bloke? Who was the Oliver Stone? His ambition for the entire shoot was to take me out and get me blind drunk.
Right.
Which I had to do. I mean, that was it. That's part of it.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd hardly ever drunk anything. And I was this prim little boy from Cambridge and all that, going out drinking with Oliver. But I did it in good spirit and all that, and got completely plastered and whatever. That was enough for him. Then I was his boy.
Okay.
You know?
So that was 72, and then 74 there was Stardust.
Yes, and
With David Essex.
David Essex and David Putnam and a lot of people of that generation. You know, I'd been up in Manchester, although I went to school right in the middle of London. I had spent most of my working life in Manchester, but doing this movie, first of all, the one with Glenda Jackson, and then Stardust, the rock and roll film, you know, brought me into London. I mean, although I was a Londoner, as a Londoner. But, you know, that connected me more into the British film industry, that I'd done that film and that I'd done good work on television and even stayed alive through Glenda and Oliver. And so that was a big jump for me, you know, and so from then on, things began to fall into place. And then I got offered, you know, a job in America.
Yeah, so was that part of the dream all along?
Oh yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, I had no delusions as to what the road was. It's whether I could get anywhere near the road.
So it seems, on the face of it, it seems a strange choice for producer Ray Stark to come to Michael Apted to make Coal Miner's Daughter, which was the first American film.
You know, the fact that I survived my way through Glenda Jackson and Oliver Reed, who are two well.
So that gave you the credibility and.
Yeah, they did, and then the other thing about Coal Miner's Daughter was that it couldn't have been a better subject for me to have done, because it was very realistic. It was North Country, and you know, it was truthful. It was about something truthful about music, and I'd always loved music, and I'd done a lot of work about music, and you know, although I didn't know much about you know, country music, the only one who did was my wife's mother, who knew all about Loretta Lynn, who I'd never heard of, and all that. So I got a lecture from my mother-in-law. You got to keep your ears open, you know, for these things.
Yeah.
But because I'd done some musical films, you know, including Stardust, that sort of showed them that I could handle that kind of thing. And the film couldn't have come out at a better time. I mean, there had been other ones, but nothing as realistic in a way as Coal Miner's Daughter, where I insisted on shooting it on location. I mean, I made it for, I forgot which company it was anyway. It was a very big company there who had so little interest in it, because they knew they could get their money back on Loretta's soundtrack.
Right.
So they just sort of go on and do it. And then on the weekend before we started, they realized we were actually shooting on location in the Appalachians. And they thought I was building scenes on the lot. And so they had a fit. But what could they do? It was casting it all, because these are the things I learned in England, you know, from directors like Kenneth Loach and Jack Gold, people who I was in awe of, you know, that when they did these films, they used real people. And it was, and of course, if you're dealing with country singers, a lot of them are terrific actors as well. You know, they may not think they are, but they are, because they're playing a part, delivering a role. And so, you know, the whole film was full of people from country music. And of course, it was very cheap, because I wasn't shooting it in Los Angeles, and I wasn't asking for huge fees for people to come on and join in. Mm-hmm. And that was a huge hit for everybody. And so, you know, I know that...
And Sissy Spacek won the Academy Award for Best Actress for that part.
We should have won more. I mean, Tommy Lee Jones should have. I mean, that was another sort of arrival of learning what really goes on, was that, you know, on day 3, he didn't show up. Fuck, what do we do here? So we don't know where he is. We're trying to find him, and then sure enough, about 2 hours later, he showed up in a police car. He'd been arrested for fighting and had got a big scar above his head where he'd been in a fight. And so we had to build, while we kind of stopped, for a day or so, we had to build him things that hid his wounds. So, I mean, here I was in real Hollywood, in the middle of Kentucky, with a leading man who can't shoot because he's cut his head open. And I was supposed to be delivering this, in like 6 weeks or something like that. But everybody pulled their weight and we got through it because it was kind of funny.
There was an article that the New York Times profiled you, did a little article in 1984, by which time you'd already made Coal Miner's Daughter, a John Belushi romantic comedy, Gorky Park, which is a mystery thriller with William Hurt, and I think you were working on a divorce, kind of Kramer versus Kramer type film, Firstborn at the time. And they titled the article, where is it now? The Apted Touch, No Fingerprints on His Films. What do you think about that? Are there fingerprints on your films?
Only if you're very interested or acute about it, but I didn't want to. It had to be about the story, it had to be about the performance, it didn't have to be about me. I mean, because I felt looking at directors who had styles that they had attached to themselves, it shut down the opportunities they had for doing things. Or he can do a comedy, or he can do a weepy or something. I tried to keep the doors open as much as possible. I mean, I didn't make it easy for myself. Crikey. Up on the Rockies with John Belushi was something, So,
because directors can get typecast just like actors can.
Yeah, and since I was a bit of a mystery anyway, because I didn't come out of America at all. I just came in with this big film to start in America and just carried on. But so really, I mean, I always looked for material from the very beginning, even from doing Coronation Street, that had emotion. Whatever I did, whatever it was, I always had to find some kind of emotional connection between the actors. It doesn't have to be between a man and a woman or all that. It could be with a child and a man or blah, blah, blah. So that was the only really thing I could do, because that's what interested me. And, I didn't have such an interesting style that I could turn a kind of ordinary styled film into something different. Something people, some of my colleagues, who are great directors of style. I didn't have a style at all. My only style was to try and, make the emotion of the film, whatever it is, a comedy or what, clear, and get to the audience, so they could feel some emotional, whatever it was, if it was a thriller or, a daft film or something like that. So I always looked for the emotional center of a film. And if I couldn't find in a script, then I wouldn't do it, because I wasn't good enough at kind of laying out wonderful histrionic cinematic things.
Yeah.
Like some genius like Ridley Scott, I mean, who can do amazing things, which, can sometimes conceal or replace.
Yeah, style can be camouflage.
Yeah, exactly. And so I did stick to what I thought I could do, and I think I was probably right, and I've never really gone outside that, although, Bond was a bit treacherous, and so was Narnia treacherous.
Yeah.
But we did navigate it somehow, and neither was a disaster. So, I mean, they were both kind of, I mean, they weren't the biggest hits in their category, but nonetheless, they were very, they did pretty well.
The films also seem to be rooted in place, and you've certainly, more than most, have worked on location through your career.
Absolutely.
Do you think that's because of the documentary background?
Definitely. I mean, it's the only thing I know. I mean, and if I'm sat on stages all the time, which I've done a lot of, I mean, I started at Granada on stages doing, an hour and a half of Coronation Street every week. But, I just loved the way that it would have an atmosphere, that a location will have an atmosphere which everybody can sense and everybody can read from. So if people are looking for the right kind of, what am I saying, a sort of language for it, there it is on the self. And I felt actors and the sort of films I like to do, which were kind of very realistic, I think actors had a much better chance of understanding it if they were shooting it on real places. It doesn't have to be the actual place that Sissy did this or that, but to put them in the approximate environment of where they would be, where the real characters would be when they did it. So, I always went after that, to try and bring as much information from the locations as I could from babbling away about, people's causes or stuff like that. Mm. And, that allowed me to do something that I enjoyed doing, although it's hair-raising, is to use people in mixed with these actors who'd never acted before, who were the real thing. I did a lot of that in Coal Miner's Daughter, and a lot of that in Gorky Park and stuff like that. Use people.
Thunderheart too.
And Thunderheart, yeah. And sometimes it got me into a lot of trouble. But I think on the whole it paid off, because what was so good about it was the actors couldn't tart it up. If they were surrounded by 5 actors who lived in the Appalachians, who lived in bloody cabins like this, and then had come out for a few days filming with that accent and thing, the actors, the real actors, had to kind of pay attention to that.
Keeps them honest.
Yeah, it does. Keeps me honest, keeps them honest.
Yeah. So 3 of the leading actors in your film, 3 of the women, were nominated for Best Actress. Yeah. So Sissy Spacek won, as we said. You also had Jodie Foster in Nell, who was nominated for Best Actress, and of course Gorillas in the Mist, Sigourney Weaver.
Yeah.
You've also worked with Jennifer Lopez. Do you have a bit of a reputation as being a good director of women?
I think so. I would.
And why is it earned?
Well, I was always interested in my mother. Be quiet, don't snigger. Good God. Can I bring a lawsuit here? No, what do I was saying? I was because my mother was the biggest influence in my life, and my mother was a very smart woman, but who never had a chance to get a job. She had 3 children to bring up and a husband to feed and all that sort of stuff. And so I think I was drawn to the plight of women in society, and I came quite early on to see how some of the real heroines of society were ordinary men and ordinary women, mm-hmm. That weren't necessarily policemen or whatever like that. And I went for that kind of story. And things like Kisses at 50, which was another big BBC film for me, which put me on the map at the BBC. That was about women fighting, for their rights and all that kind of stuff. So I always felt that the tension in women's lives was very real. A real thing that if they have children, they've got to bring up children, and if they want a career, they've got to do that, and there's no way around it, they've got to do it. And so that drives them, and I like that. I was interested in that, in the way that these women really did get a lot done by the fact that, they had a career and they had children. What more could you answer? And they could make money, real money acting and paying for nannies and stuff like that. But I just thought that women's drama generally was more important than men's drama, because it was in every household, women's drama, whereas men, went out and shot people and do that, or had a few jokes. I'm just talking about acting jobs, but women's acting jobs tend to be a little more serious-minded, and I like that. I've got 3 fans here.
Yeah, very good. Okay, I'm going to have to speed things up. We have a little countdown clock here, which is very disconcerting. So you're living the Hollywood dream.
Yes.
Making big budget movies with movie stars, but you keep going back to 7-Up.
Oh, yes.
Why was it important that you stayed with it every 7 years?
Because I held the whole thing together. Granada didn't. I mean, if they said they wouldn't give any money for it, they could have done, but they realized, I think, more than I did, that I was very important for it. I would keep the whole thing together. I didn't think of it like that, but looking back on it like that, if they could deliver me to the 13, 14 people in it, there was more likelihood that they would come back. And the whole key to it was to get them back. That was the whole point of research and preparation, was to make sure they showed up.
Yeah.
You know, what the questions and finding out what's been going on wasn't that difficult. You know, that wasn't brain surgery, but the fact to keep them interested in it. And Granada realized how valuable it was in terms of money and in terms of everything, for their prestige and all that. It was very much in their interest to I mean, they didn't have to worry about me, but I'm sure they thought about would I ever come back, having just done, say, Coal Miner's Daughter with Academy Awards and all that. Would I come back and do whatever it was we were talking about? But I just believe so profoundly that it could only do me good and also make the films better the longer I did it. That when you give up after 2 or 3 things, then so what? You've got to keep it going. And we have. I mean, a couple of people dropped out and came back. Only one dropped out and never came back. So he
works in television.
Huh? Yeah, well, yeah. I hardly dare get into that story because I had him killed. No, I mean, it's been hard work getting them back. And,
I mean, clearly they have a love-hate relationship.
Yes, they do, definitely. And I try not to, I never try and lie to them, although I need something from them seriously, and I'm prepared to go quite a long way to get it. But I just never sort of hung them out to dry or asked them for things that I didn't really need, or was very kind of, sort of flexible about how we could do something, as long as they did a bit that I thought was necessary in the whole kind of rhythm of the film. Yeah.
I mean, it's actually, in terms of time commitment, you're not asking very much from them. It might be a couple of days.
Yeah, no, seriously. But it's very well known. I mean, and a lot of them, I never know whether it's true or not, but a lot of them kind of get embarrassed when it comes out and go and hide, in the up in the roof and things like that. But I think at the end of the day, they do enjoy it because it is successful, and it would be very difficult now to make it not successful, if you know what I mean, because we've done so much layers of the thing now. Almost anything that they do or say is of interest, and all that amazing archives we've got. My small dog could probably do it. No, I won't tell anybody that, but I mean, it's possible.
And as you look back on it, because I'm about to open this up to questions from the audience, but as you look back on the series now, this long period of peace and prosperity, relative peace and prosperity in Britain, and yet ordinary lives of immense drama in some cases. Mm-hmm. How has it been something that has helped you on your own journey?
Oh yeah, I'm sure it has. Without being annoying, I mean, you pick up stuff from all sorts of people and what they go through. And I remember when I was bringing up my children, or not bringing up my children, I would ask them about in an ingenuous way, and they would tell me how they managed to keep part of their lives for their sons or daughters or whatever, and not just disappear off in in the world, and out of sight of anybody, hundreds of thousands of miles away working. But at the end of the day, I always made the decision that this thing I was doing, was unique. And it never stopped being unique and never will stop being unique. No one could ever copy it because the world won't give them the time or money to do it. It's always, I did it at exactly the right time, not because I'm any cleverer than anybody else, but the time that I was doing this was a time when ITV was getting much more aggressive, and there was much more programming coming out, and it was being run by the BBC and ITV, and they had a good grip on it. But now we see that generally everything's falling apart, and if a thing like that I wouldn't have survived if these companies hadn't fallen apart. Granada were always there for me all the time.
Right.
But because we tried to do an American one, and it just complete failure because you have to have the key to that series. You've got to have the rights of all the film, because you probably want to go back and something that was done at 14 up, you have to put into 70 up or something. So you've got to own everything, and the companies couldn't be bothered to do that. So that was that. I mean, they all gurgled with delight when we did one at CBS and all that. They thought, "Oh, this is great." Didn't do it anymore.
Yeah.
It changed hands, the management, the whole. I mean, business is of profound importance in America. Making money, whoever you are, whatever. Whereas I never thought that about England. I felt that in all part of English life that if people had commitment to stuff, the fact that we're going to make not very much money, it didn't necessarily shut it down. They took enough pleasure in doing the job than they did in. But the American system is so completely run by, industry and by whatever that that they wouldn't bet on it.
It's a long-term investment.
Yeah, and it would cost them nothing.
Yeah.
Nothing at all. But that wasn't the point. The point was this one isn't going to make us quite so much money.
We better let you guys have some questions. We have some volunteers with microphones.
I was wondering if you could talk just a little bit about rehearsing with actors and allowing them or not allowing them to improvise. And I have a particular film in mind, which is Thunderheart, because I've heard two stories involving different people either improvising or not improvising on the script on that one. So I'm just wondering if you could speak a little to that. Thank you.
Yes, so that was, I sort of touched on that a bit and saying that in certain cases when I rely more heavily on the general public to be actors in it, if it's something that has to have certain skills or whatever, and certainly doing that film, there's such a lot of stuff going on in it, that it's good if someone knows what to do and can teach me something while we're doing it. But I think the more people would want to put their own lives into their work for me, then the more I like it. I mean, what do I know? I depend on the writer of the thing, and I don't know what he depends on. But if someone comes in who's been put in the film and says, well, this is wrong and all that, I'll absolutely listen to it, because I don't. If we've made a mistake and it's something that I can change and recover from, then I do it. If I get a gift horse, I look it in the mouth. And some people, who come, some of those actors who were members of different tribes who were in it, were very interested in me having an open mind about some of the what they do and how they do it and all that. Because if I can, in most of the films I do, it's kind of important to get the details accurate. And I never turned a chance down to have an actor tell me when I know he knows more about it than I do, you know, to teach me how to behave. I don't mean in life, but in directing the film. So, you know, I'm never, I mean, then it gets a bit out of hand and they want to take over the film. And then my car doesn't arrive the next day. No, just joking. No, I mean, I'd like to get it as right as possible, because, you know, you have to fight the story, you have to fight the narrative of the story, the emotional movement of the story, without making ludicrous mistakes or ludicrous, you know, ideas about something which someone else who's stood in front of me knows much more about it than I do. And if he says that I'm a fool to do that, I will certainly listen to him and try and remove the foolishness.
I hate to do this, but my countdown clock gives us 31 seconds.
31
and
seconds?
Michael has a plane to go off and catch, so I really can't push it. But I will say there are 2 more screenings. We added an additional screening of 63 Up, which is next Saturday. I believe the second scheduled screening is tomorrow. Anyway, go to VIFF.org for that. And please show your appreciation for Michael joining us here.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you very much.